Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Big Blend Radio with Nancy and Lisa. You know, the mother-daughter travel team on our Love Your Parks tour and also publishers of the different Big Blend magazines. Today, we're very excited to welcome photographer Deanne Burch onto the show. She's got an incredible story about when she got married and moved to Alaska right above the Arctic Circle. I mean, think about it. Going from a city out in the middle of basically nowhere and living a completely different life than what she thought was going to happen. It's all documented in her memoir. It's called Journey Through Fire and Ice, Shattered Dreams Above the Arctic Circle. I encourage you to go to her website. It's deannburch.com. That's D-E-A-N-N-E and Burch with a U. So welcome, Deanne. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. It's good to have you on the show. Nancy's been enjoying reading your memoir and walking out going, holy cow, she did this. Holy cow, she did that. And I don't know, it just sounds like you were in a place that was very cold, and neither one of us do really good with
don't do good at cold.
I don't do good at cold anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't get easier with that. But you know, tell us a little bit, just a start of how you met your husband, Tiger.
Excuse me, we both had cottages on a lake called Muskoka. It was 120 miles from Toronto. And I grew up in Toronto, but his parents had a cottage on Lake Muskoka. And I first saw him across the room when I was 15. And I thought, wow, he's really good looking. And then I was invited down to a party that his sister had. And at that time I had a very serious boyfriend, but I went as Tiger's date, and I had a wonderful time, but went back to my, the boyfriend was my reality and Tiger was kind of a dream. And then one summer when Lynn, who was Tiger's sister and one of my best friends, was away for the summer, Tiger's mother, and my place was going to be used by a lot of relatives. Tiger's mother said, well, the boys are going to be lonely without a sister. Why don't you come up and stay at our place? And I said, are you sure? That would be great. And she said, yes, we'd love to have you come up. And that was the beginning of our romance.
Ooh. And then you get married and off you go to the Arctic Circle. Is that something you planned on?
It was something he planned on. I knew if I married him, I was going to have to go to the Arctic Circle. And our plan, of course, was to go for 2 years. I wasn't very keen on going, but, I was in love and I decided I was going to go wherever my husband went. And that's where he wanted to go.
So did you have any kind of way of preparing yourself for this?
That is a very good question. I really and truly do not think that he prepared me very well. I had no idea what the village was going to look like. I knew what the native people looked like because, of course, I'd seen pictures of them when I was a kid, and they were all bundled up in parkas and looked like it was cold outside. But I didn't know what the houses were going to be like. I didn't know that when I arrived in May that the snow would be right up to the bottom of the windows and up to the top of my waist. So I would say I wasn't really prepared at all to go up there. He told me, oh, just take up slacks and blue jeans and sweaters and I'll get you a parka and you're going to be just fine. So
wow. And had he been there before? Obviously.
Oh no, the furthest I had been until we got married, and we went to Europe on our honeymoon actually, but the furthest I'd ever been before we got married was to Chicago to visit him because he was at the University of Chicago. I had never really been outside of my comfort zone until we went to Europe. And that was even a little bit outside my comfort zone. So you can imagine what it was like going to a small village. I mean, that was totally out of my comfort zone.
And he had been there before you moved there?
Yes, he had lived there for I guess about 10 months. He was working with the Atomic Research Committee up there. And they were thinking of building some kind, I'm not sure what they were doing, but anyway, he was opposed to it and he was helping, I guess, lobby not to do that kind of thing up there.
Mm. So getting out there and like the complete different, going way out of your comfort zone and having to do things, live in a different way in a village. I mean, it's not like you just go to Walmart and get a park.
No.
It's not like you didn't just go around the corner for dinner either.
No, there were no restaurants there. I don't even know if there are restaurants there today. There may be. I certainly haven't seen any on the various posts I've seen on Facebook, but I don't know. But certainly we could go to the store, but the store didn't have very much in it. When the plane came twice a week, it usually brought bread and cigarettes, and they were gone very quickly, both the bread and the cigarettes. The store really was not very full of many things until the North Star came up, which was the cargo ship. And then the store got all sorts of things. But no, we couldn't go around the store, around the corner to go to a store. And there's certainly were no restaurants. And I was a city girl. And, I couldn't believe, I mean, I had one foot in my city life and one foot in the village life for most of the time I was up there.
I remember once in Kenya, we had a toilet paper shortage.
Oh.
So, and that was fun because it just seemed, I mean, there's really nothing you can do about it. There's no one you can phone and say, hey, fix it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so you just kind of have to think outside the box, do something different. And I don't know, it's funny now, but I didn't think it was all that much fun then. It wasn't funny then.
I'm sure it wasn't. What did you do?
Yeah, Nancy.
Well, there's tissues and other kinds of paper bags. The Africans use leaves.
That's what I wondered.
Yeah. I found enough bags not to have to go leaf.
Well, I mean, it is, you think about COVID, how everybody panicked and bought toilet paper and, went
Exactly.
crazy and just had that big paranoia. But it seemed that you kind of had to live off the land. And were you alone a lot of the time, or was he there, or?
He went away quite a bit on short hunting trips, maybe for 2 days at a time. And then I went up the first time to fish camp with him, but I didn't go up the second time. And he was probably gone for 5 days at that point. When we lived in Kotzebue with two of our children, he was away a lot then. He'd go away for 5 or 6 days at a time to different villages, but he didn't do that when we were up there. He would just kind of go off on these short little hunting trips. And the women were really used to it because they were used to their husbands going away. I wasn't used to that because I didn't know whether he'd come back alive. There were no phones. There was no way of knowing whether they'd, maybe fallen through the ice or something. But the women up there just took it in their stride. It was as though, it was to them, it was something that was just their way of life, but it wasn't my way of life.
Well, could you even garden? Or did you have to really live off of the ice?
No, there was
Can't
no
live off the land.
There was no gardening. We certainly picked a lot of berries in the late summer. The blueberries were, I don't even know where you're from, actually.
We travel full time, but we've lived all over Africa and Arizona, California.
Well, they're like the blueberries up there, like the wild blueberries you get in Maine, or the wild blueberries that you get in Canada. But you couldn't even pick fast enough to get all the blueberries that were up there. They also had wild greens that were kind of like spinach, but I thought they tasted a lot. They were more bitter than spinach was. But that was the two things really that we could get off the land. I think they were blackberries. But at that point, I didn't like blackberries. I'm not even sure they were the same as the blackberries that you get now in the supermarkets. So And I don't think they had cranberries, but those were basically the things that as far as vegetation was concerned, were the things that we ate. And we did import things from the Safeway store in Fairbanks. Not a lot. We did live off the land a lot. We ate seal meat and seal liver and caribou, and we had
Seal liver.
seal liver. If you like liver, which most people don't.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to do the big ew.
Yeah.
The seal liver was better than any calf's liver I ever had. Or maybe it was because because we hadn't had fresh meat for so long. That could be. But we also ate a lot of Arctic char, which was a wonderful fish. And we managed eating a lot of native food, which a lot of it was good. A lot of it, was things that I didn't particularly want to eat. But when we went on a camping trip in the middle of the winter, the seal oil was something that kept us really warm. I don't think anything else would have warmed us up so fast as having some seal oil.
So are you saying you would like take a teaspoonful of oil?
Well, I think you could have done that. I think we had dried fish in oil, but I definitely think you could have taken a teaspoon of oil and that would have warmed you up just maybe even quicker than dipping the fish into the seal oil. I think that would have been quick.
Is it spicy?
No, it's just kind of bland. It's not, I wouldn't say it's tasteless. I wouldn't say, I can't really compare it to any kind of oil. It's, yeah. And of course, it's a long time ago. So
yeah,
I kind of have a hard time remembering that kind of thing.
Tell us a bit about what led you to write obviously it's a really unique way of life that many people have not had that experience, and it's unique and something that strengthens whenever you go out of your comfort zone and travel, and in life it always strengthens you in some way. But what led you to say, okay, I'm going to write this down? And did you have a diary that you worked off of?
No, I had a journal, but as I was saying, I did a thing at a book club the other day, and I never really, my journal was just like, well, today we woke up and it was a nice day. And, it wasn't a very good journal, but I had written a lot of letters, probably 2 or 3 times a week, to my parents and to my in-laws, and they saved all the letters for me. So I had all the letters that I'd written to Alaska, as well as a friend of mine who saved my letters. And I had her letters that I'd written from Alaska too. She used it as a teaching aid for the children that she was teaching. So I had a lot of reference, but I think, when you kind of have lived on the edge of a tragedy, I think that you remember that more than you would if everything had been sweetness and light. I think you remember that time of your life much more clearly.
Yeah, because that was the fire part of your story, is just that sounded horrific.
Well, of course, there's 2 fires, the one that on our trip, and then the one where my husband was badly burned. And that was horrific because, if the plane hadn't finally arrived when it did, the school teacher would have tried to have performed a tracheostomy. He would have died. So, it was just by the grace of God that the plane got in and got out, because there was ice fog all over the place. It was so cold. And we were just very lucky.
And this because you're using lanterns, right? Something, again, you got to think, this isn't like you just,
Turn on a light.
Yeah.
Well, he was burned because, and he says he wasn't, but I know that it did. He was burned initially when the flames from the fumes went up in his face. When he lit the lamp, there was still residual fumes in the air. And he lit the lamp and the flames went up in his face. And we both got out and he went back to save his notes. And I'm sure he was thinking then, I think he was in shock because he said he couldn't get the fire extinguisher to work. And he went into the fire with both of his hands over his face, and his hands were badly burned. So I know that right in the beginning, when the flames went up in his face, I know he was burned then. And to the day he died, he said he wasn't, but I know he was, because he didn't have his hands over his ears and his ears sloughed off. And as I said, his hands were badly burned. So I think his hands protected his face from being burned even more than it was burned initially.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So what did you do, especially when he was gone on a hunting trip? What did you do all day?
Well, a lot of the hunting trips that he took, in fact, I would say most of them, because they were in the summer when he was hunting for seal and for that kind of thing, it was during the midnight sun. So, I could cook a loaf of bread at 9 o'clock at night, wander around the village, wait until the bread rose, and then put the bread in the oven and wait until it was time to take it out of the oven. But a lot of the times when he was away, I would go and visit or watch some of the women and try to learn how to do things like cutting up a seal or the kinds of things that I was expected to do. And so, basically that's what I did when he was away. Or, because it was light outside, I'd never liked to light kerosene lanterns. I'd always been afraid of fire, even as a little girl. So I would, but it was light, so I could read in the house. We had a nice window and I just sit and read by the window. And oh my gosh, I went through, I think, every Russian novel that was ever written and all the bestsellers. I mean, everybody kept us in books. So there was always a book for me to read. My husband wasn't much on reading novels, but I read so many books up there that, I've forgotten most of them now, but I always had a book in my hand and I did a lot of knitting. So, I guess I never sat around and said, oh my God, I am so lonely since he's away. I didn't really think about it, too much.
I just think, it's such a remote kind of way of life, which in some ways I would like, but I don't know if I could do it in that kind of setting.
Cold.
Yeah, it was, I mean, is it always cold, like every single day, or does the summer get warm?
No, the summer I think when we were up there, the highest it was 75. And that maybe lasted for 3 days. And it was wonderful. However, this summer, the temperature went up to 88 degrees.
Wow.
Because of climate change.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine being up there in those little, a lot of them aren't, well, they probably are. They probably have 2 or 3 small rooms, but I expect that they were pretty darn hot when the temperature went up to 88 degrees. I'm quite sure that they were hot. But the days that we had 75, it just felt like heaven because you're so used to you were so used to having colder weather. And when we arrived there, and it was about probably about the 20th of May, it was 22 degrees outside. So I wasn't really prepared for that. I had left Harrisburg and the temperatures were warm and all the flowers were out, the daffodils were blooming and the tulips were blooming and the bluebells just started to bloom. And we got up to Kivalina and there was still snow all over the ground and actually snow on the oceans too, as well.
Wow. With the temperature changing today, when you think about that area, I mean, I'm worried about areas like that, with climate change and, the melting of the glaciers and villages having to move. We've seen that that's happening.
Well, Kivalina is the first village up there to really be affected by climate change. And according to the scientists, it will be underwater by 2025.
Oh my God.
So they're building their village about 12 miles upriver. I hope that's far enough because, you don't know. And I believe the school is completed now. I don't know whether there are any houses that have started to be built. Wow. But one thing I do feel, and I really need to ask somebody about it, I really wonder how the elders are feeling about this because, if you're in your 80s or even in your mid 70s, you've lived there all your life. And, how do you feel about all of a sudden having to move and rebuild again?
And also the ancestral ties, It's not just
Yeah.
having lived there, but there's your family and burial sites and, you
Well, I
know,
think it's the burial sites, and I think I asked what was going to happen, but I don't think the burial sites, I don't think they're going to dig up bottom. They
Mhm.
might they might
Mm.
possibly take they're not really gravestones, but the grave markings that are there. They
Mm.
might take that to the village with them. I don't know. I don't know what they'll take.
wow.
Wow.
That's really sad. And so for
Mm.
writing your book, your memoir, it's special that people can kind of connect to an area that we're looking, I mean, that's people still, we're having arguments on climate change. Don't you kind of think it's ridiculous when you can see a place that you lived in is actually moving?
Oh,
I mean, oh
absolutely.
my God. I mean, just think of, I mean, that's just proof right there. And yet we still have these people thinking, you know,
Well,
that
that's
Climate
that.
change doesn't-
I
Yeah.
think that's just because people don't want to admit that we caused it. They
I
they
think
don't want to admit that.
yeah, I agree with you, but maybe there would have been climate change anyway.
yeah,
Forget there
just
was an ice age, and then there was other.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I
So
mean, obviously, we have created a lot of the climate change. There's no
right.
question about that.
I think
Mm,
we pushed it to come upon us far quicker than if we hadn't done all the things that we have done
mm.
Oh,
and are still
absolutely.
doing,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just hard to admit that we're so smart that we did it.
Well, that's right. No, you're absolutely right about that.
Wow. I don't think I've ever met someone who's, well, no, we've done some shows. Former Ambassador Carlisle Richardson is a former UN ambassador to climate change, has been on our shows over the years, and
Mm.
he's now in Australia, and he is from the islands, the Caribbean islands, and he really was about the islands are in
Mm.
so much trouble in regards to climate change. So to think about your village that you were in and the people there, it just is really brings it home in a very vivid way.
Mhm.
On the other side of this, I know you've studied sociology and social work and going like, where did you go into photography, becoming a photographer? Was it out there? I mean, because light, I mean, when we think about light, and Nancy and I traveling full time, we document parks and public lands. And with us traveling, we've seen so many different versions of light. We've been
Yes.
through the snow in snowstorms in the Midwest. We've been to, we lived in the desert, the high desert, and the Sonoran Desert have two different lights. I mean, the lighting that has got to have been really interesting watching the light. And did that ever steer you towards photography, seeing the light up there?
No, I think what steered me towards photography was, well, first of all, when we were on our honeymoon, my husband tried to teach me how to use a camera, and I was dense. I had no idea of what he was talking about, and I didn't want to learn. And then we got up there, and the children in the village were so adorable, and I wanted to learn to use a camera, and I decided that what I was going to ask for was a camera for Christmas. And of course, he was burned. But then when we got back to the village, he bought us both what was called a dial 35 camera. And instead of taking 36 exposures, it took 72 exposures.
Ooh.
So it was a half frame 35 millimeter camera.
Oh.
And my husband had done quite a bit of photography the first year there, or the first 7 months that we were up there, although he didn't do any in the winter at all. Of course, don't forget, it was dark in the winter.
Yeah.
So it was a
Sure.
little bit harder to do photography, in the winter,
Mhm.
unless you were out in the snow. So when we got up the next year, I started photographing, and I went out and took, I guess there was there were so many wildflowers up there that I took pictures of every single wildflower. And
Cool.
then, of course, I started taking pictures of the children, and I knew nothing about photography, absolutely nothing, except that a lot of the photographs that I took actually were good. And I kind of toyed with the idea of maybe becoming a photographer at that point. But of course, then we had kids. And when we finally moved to Harrisburg, I said to my husband, I'm going to be a photographer. And I was determined. I knew really nothing about photography, except a little bit I'd done up there. And my husband gave me a rangefinder, and I took pictures of my kids with the rangefinder. So I learned really quickly about what light does to the faces, you know,
Mhm.
when it says that you have keep the sun behind your back and take the picture of your subject. Well, no, you don't do that because the person has dark circles under their eyes and all sorts of shadows on your face. And so I learned pretty quickly that that wasn't the way to do it. But that's really how I started. I would say that my love affair with photography began when we were up in Alaska in 1965.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow. And so, the photography, it's always interesting to look through the lens and then sometimes just take it away, and then go back in through there. You have it's a focus, that I think sometimes not doing photography, we miss things. And then sometimes as photographers, I think we miss things because we're too busy framing a photo. you
Oh,
know?
that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm too, and I'm too busy when I am taking a photograph, trying to make it perfect. Whereas we were out yesterday, and one of the people that I was out with, took a picture of my significant other and myself, and it wasn't very good, but it was a memory. And of course, I want my memories to be just so. I want them to be perfect, which is ridiculous because all you want is the memory. You don't care whether the person has a shadow on their face or something. But I looked at the picture and I thought, no, I don't like that. But actually, for the memory, I did like it.
See, that's funny. That's funny.
Mm.
So going from, Alaska and then back to the States, we go to Harrisburg, and by the way, it's a beautiful area. We were in Pennsylvania, we go to Pennsylvania all the time for some reason. It just keeps bringing us back. But going from a remote area back into city life, did it take time to get used to the hustle bustle and sound?
Well, actually, when we lived in Harrisburg, we lived on a farm. So
Okay.
Okay.
we were outside of the city. My husband was having a lot of surgery on his face, and he was having his ears rebuilt. And I was pregnant,
Wow.
and my sister-in-law was coming home a lot. She was ill at the time. And so no, I didn't get into the city very much. I really didn't. And the city, Harrisburg, is not a very big city. So there wouldn't have been the hustle bustle back then as there is today. And so I think I noticed it more when we moved to Winnipeg because I was driving and I had small kids. And I think I noticed it more then than I did the first year that we lived in, came back to civilization. But of course, the one thing that was really wonderful about coming back to civilization was having a shower and an indoor toilet. That was
Yeah.
that was really, and that was just wonderful.
Especially when
I
it's
can relate
cold.
to
I mean, when
that.
you have to go pee pee in the middle of the night and it's dark and it's cold. I mean, when
Mm-mm.
we lived in Kenya and in South Africa, there was a few times when we lived out in the boonies, and
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm.
there's wildlife out there, like real
Mhm.
wildlife, and so just going out in the dark and I don't know, it's almost like you train I think to this day I've trained my bladder to behave itself. You're not going out.
I totally agree with that. I had one line in my book, and I think it said, "I'm going to have to perfect the art of holding on."
Yep.
Mhm. Yep.
Because
We're
it's true, and
aware
I
of
think that's
that.
why I'm good at travel now, is because I can just I'm holding it. Like, I think I remember that one time, Nancy and you and I driving, we're all the way from the Black Canyon of Gunnison National Park up in Colorado, all the way down, all the way to Holbrook, Arizona, through Shiprock, through New Mexico, mountain
Mhm.
passes, all the way.
Always
I mean,
New
that
Mexico. There's
always
no
New Mexico.
ladies'
There's no
rooms in New
bathrooms.
Mexico.
There's no
There's
bathrooms in New
nothing.
Mexico. It just happens. But I think that's something that we take for granted. And honestly, it hasn't been that long that we've had indoor toilets or bathrooms. When you think about it, it's been what, 100 years, if
Yeah,
that
you're
we've
probably
had.
right. About 100 years. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, it's a luxury, but you don't realize what a luxury is until you don't have it.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. And we, in the middle of the night, quite frankly, we had a little chamber pot in our bedroom so that if we had to get up in the middle of the night, we didn't have to go outside. But when it was cold, you know, you'd have to, before you could even go outside, you'd have to put your parka on and zip yourself up because you knew it was going to be really cold we had, I guess, you know, we had a shed where our honey bucket or whatever you call it was put. And that was really much nicer than what the natives had, because it was more like going to an outhouse than it was, you know, having it in the shed where everybody comes in through the front door and your honey bucket is right there at the front door. So, you know, we had a little bit of a luxury when we were up there.
Wow. So people had it right at the front door. I didn't
A lot, yeah.
know that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a welcome.
Well,
Yeah,
hello.
Well, I mean, so what happens if you go visit someone? I mean, if you have to go, do you go like right there in front of them, or is it closed off?
I held on. I mean, you know.
She held on.
She held on.
I think that's we'll title this podcast. She held on.
Mhm.
But I mean, again, that's something that differentiates, you know, where you were living, you know. So was the village obviously mostly, you know, Native American indigenous people?
No, they were what we knew as Eskimos. They're called the Inuits now, and they call themselves Inupiaq. But they were, with the exception of the school teacher and ourselves, everybody else was Inuit. So yeah, so it was
Cool.
it was a totally different way of life because you had to adapt to the culture that they were part of.
Did you ever think you were going to eat seal? I mean, really, even like seal liver, like you're saying, I'm like,
I know, it's like crazy, yeah.
I don't, but if you're hungry, right? You're going to get over it.
Well, no, I mean, of course I like liver. So, you know, I figured, well, you know, I can do something with this liver. And I thought it was delicious, but most people don't like liver. So, you know, for them to have to cook it up, and actually after they've butchered the seal and cooking up the liver that you've butchered, I suppose that isn't really a very pleasant thought, but other men go hunting and they'll bring the deer home and they'll eat, you know, the deer heart or whatever it is. So it wasn't too much different from that, except that the woman I worked with and I were the ones that were butchering the seals, and it wasn't the men that were butchering the seals.
Wow.
Wow. Did you use the skin?
Oh yeah, they use the skin. What happens is that they take the blubber off of the skin my husband gave me a knife, which was next to impossible to use, but they took it off of what was called an ulu. And it was a kind of a half, I can't even describe it, but it's like a half circle. And so you could get under the skin really well with the ulu and get the blubber off of the skin. So the blubber was put into a bucket, and then it later rendered into seal oil, kind of just melted into seal oil. And the skins were used for all kinds of things. I mean, the women made mucklucks out of the skin, or they made skin boats. And I had several pictures actually, you know, that I have of the women making the seal skin boats. And actually, one of the pictures has the boat right behind it, which I guess was waiting for its sealskin cover. And but and I guess they also probably maybe make parkas, but basically it's mucklucks and covers for the boats.
Wow.
And
I didn't know about the boats.
Maybe for kayak too. They might be made out of seal skins. But you know, when I was up there, I never saw a kayak. So
What a way of living. I mean, at least you did have airplanes. I mean, you know, when you're talking about for your husband, when, you know, to get him flown out, what was the emergency? Like, how did you get that emergency call out?
Well, the school teacher had a radio, and I guess it was one of those radios that you can call out to, and he called out to the airport, or not to the airport. I guess it was the airport, and it was so cold that we couldn't make any contact with them. And I said, well, what's wrong? He said, I can't make contact. It's too cold. And finally, he was able to make contact. And they said they would send a plane up as soon as they could. We were without medical help for 17 hours. So,
Wow.
Yeah, so it was really quite a horrible experience. And then we were flown to Kotzebue, which had the nearest hospital. And I thought, oh, good, it's going to be okay now. And the doctors there took one look at him. They said, we can't treat him here. And so they sent us down on a plane to Anchorage. They sent a doctor with us, and they sent us down to Anchorage, where he could have better treatment than he would have had in Kotzebue.
Wow. What an ordeal, huh?
Mhm.
To go through. It's like, that's not an ambulance coming, it's wow. Did you learn any, survival skills or medical skills, first aid things before you went, or did you just go and see what happened?
Well, when you're young, you don't think anything's going to happen to you.
That's right. And it's like, oh, I'm invincible.
Yeah, exactly. But before we took our children up in 1969, I did take a St. John's, I guess that's a Canadian thing, but I did take a course in medical, in that, in case some kind of a, in case something would come up like that. But no, I mean, I knew nothing at all about how to treat burns or anything else. I didn't know that you were supposed to put cold water, or, the snow on the burns would have been much better than, and I don't really remember what they did. I don't think they put Vaseline on them, but I don't remember.
Yeah,
I had no
I
idea.
remember burns. They used to one point, it was the old wives' tale of using butter on a burn, and then it's like, don't do that now. Now it's a no. So it's kind of a,
Well, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking about the Vaseline.
Mhm.
But I have really, I think I was just waiting for my husband to take his last breath. So I don't think I paid any attention to anything else except
it's scary.
waiting for him to breathe.
That's scary. I mean, it's a traumatic situation to go
Oh,
through.
it was very traumatic.
Wow.
No, that is. I mean, and then just being in that setting. It's not like we have, 911 on our phone. We just push a button and,
Exactly.
Mhm.
Wow. So going through all of that and then, coming back to the States, what do you think you took from that experience that enhanced your life?
Oh, I think I learned that I was a stronger person than I thought I was. I mean, I went up as, I think in some ways this story is almost a coming of age story, because I went up as a young woman, little more than a teenager, and I was immature, I guess. But I realized that through this whole experience, I became a strong woman. And I truly believe that that's what made me into the person that I am today. It did change our whole life forever, really. And so I think I learned that, you can triumph over a tragedy like that. The other thing I came back with was that really, you can adapt to any culture. And obviously you travel a lot so that you can adapt to any culture. You may not want to, but you can do it, and you can survive in that culture.
Yeah, I think that's really how you can control your own thoughts, and it's really how dedicated are you to sticking it out and doing what you said you're going to do, or because it's much easier to quit.
Oh, my friends all said, oh, I would have been home on the first plane.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting too. Nancy said, as she's starting to read your book, she goes, this, you've got to think of like how relationships were and how women were viewed, and where we were as women at that time frame too, in regards to education, into following the husband kind of thing.
Exactly.
It was a different time of what we are now as women too.
Totally different time. I don't know when the Feminine Mystique was written, but I think it was right around the time possibly that we went up there, or shortly thereafter. But I didn't think of it. We were brought up to, basically we could be a school teacher, a nurse.
Here we go, Nancy. There you go.
A social worker.
That's what Nancy.
Yep.
But I mean, nobody ever said, well, would you like to be a lawyer? Well, no, I would never have wanted to be a lawyer. But there were a lot of other things that I might have wanted to be. I might have wanted to be a doctor, you know, I don't know. It was just it never even crossed my mind that I could do that.
No, doctors are always men and women get to be the nurse.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
And then you
my
become a
parents told me that
photographer.
all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You know, they really, and then when I said I'm going to Africa, they just laughed. And then they started getting letters from Africa.
Yep. And she lived down the bush. You've heard of Joy Adamson, Elsa the Lion, and
Oh, yes.
Born Free.
Yes.
That's who she worked for
I
in
worked for
Kenya.
her.
Wow.
Yeah,
the
so
bush.
I learned a lot. And I know about going to the outhouse at night when there's lions and
Snakes.
leopards growling.
Wow.
Outdoor showers.
You go real fast. Oh, and the outdoor shower was a bucket at the top of this tall tree, and they poured cold water, and there's holes in the bucket, and that was your shower.
Oh, well, of course, we had a wash tub, and
Oh, that's
we took
cool.
a bath was in a wash tub.
Yeah.
And how did you get your water? Like, did you have
Well, you know, we had to go upriver to get fresh water,
Yeah.
and so it was probably, I don't know how far we had to go before the water was not salty, but that's what we would do. We go upriver, but then in the winter you cut up chunks of ice, and the ice would melt in the we had an oil drum, so the ice would melt in the oil drum, and eventually, you know, we'd have water, but the water was always cold. So you would heat the water on the stove in about 3 pots before you could even begin to wash your clothes.
Yeah.
Because it was so cold.
Oh, wow. To even wash your clothes.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like the cold setting on the laundry.
No.
Washing machine.
Exactly. I mean, I used to cold setting all the time, but this was cold. It was cold.
Wow. And so it's like, that's the other thing, like,
funny.
take a shower a day kind of thing. It's when you're out in those circumstances, water usage becomes a big deal. You don't waste water at all.
That is exactly right. And, you know, when I first got up there, I thought, well, you know, these people probably don't keep themselves as clean as I would like to be. Well, you know what? I learned pretty quickly that because of the, you know, the lack of water and, you know, my standards of cleanliness changed totally. You know, they're back to what they were, but certainly my standards changed completely when I was up there.
Yeah.
Well, this is, you know, going back to climate change and them having to move because of that and the rising water. And here are the people not using all the water. You know what I mean? It's backwards.
You know? Well, you know, I think when they move up there, I think they'll be far enough that they will get fresh water, and it's possible that they can have running water. They don't really have running water right now in the village. So I think that, you know, it's possible that their lives will change for the better. But until they actually get moved up there, and until they feel comfortable, you know, I don't know how they're going to feel as far as, you know, this huge lifestyle change.
Wow. It's you know, because it is just like, I mean, it sounds like Little House on the Prairie, but in like an extreme, you know, when you live off the land and the snow, and, you know, things, you know, they got to make maple syrup, you know, it's a little different, you know, so that, but it's about living, like your day-to-day life is about survival and living, versus now it's, you know, our lifestyles now, I'm just generalizing, you know, what the general populace is, how much money can we make? And did you, you know, buy the right car? Did you, you know, do you have the latest iPhone? Do you have the, you know what I mean? We've changed. Whereas
you're right about that.
The lifestyle you led, I think it was pure, you know, it's pure, it's hard work. But you understand the value of water, you understand the value of food, and I think there's values to it.
You're right. You are right about that. You certainly do. And, you know, you think of the water shortages in California, and the fact that I think they're in the middle of a drought, and, you know, they have trouble fighting the forest fires. But, you know, you think about the people up in Alaska that, you know, they're surrounded by water, but it's all salt water, at least.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
What do you think now when you go into one of these big super hypermarkets? with hundreds of things to choose from. And, you know, because I know your shopping couldn't have been all that great up there in Alaska. I mean, I know what we went through in Kenya when we left Kenya and went to live in England. There was just so many stores with so many different kinds of bread and so many different kinds of soap. And when we came back here, it was even more. Yeah, it was kind of shocking compared to, you know, here's 5 things on the shelf.
It was
Good luck.
overwhelming. It was overwhelming. We
was.
left
Yeah.
a cart when we were in England. When we left Kenya, we went to England. We
Mm.
left a full cart in the grocery store. Then when we went from South Africa to here, we did the exact same thing
Mhm.
because just didn't understand why there were so many butters. Why do you need 10 different rices?
So many
Like,
different brands of
why,
everything.
yeah, you know, it's like maize. I could understand different things. You know, I just didn't understand why you needed, you know, that many butters, like butter.
Well, no, I agree with you. I
Mm.
mean, I hadn't really thought about it. I think I was just glad to be back in civilization
Mm.
and be able to get fresh vegetables and fresh fruit.
Mm.
Mm.
And that was
Yeah.
what I had missed the most was vegetables and fruit. And I
Mm.
guess cheese too, because I
Oh.
don't think we had any cheese up there. And cheese,
Oh no, that sucks.
yeah.
Yeah, that does suck.
We did have
We-
butter. We got butter in cans. So we had butter up there. But we certainly didn't have anything like cheese or that.
We didn't have any trouble getting fruits and vegetables. The African women would come in big baskets of veggies and fruits on their head, and they would come 2-3 times a day, and you didn't even have to go to a store if you wanted to buy from them. It was all just freshly picked.
Yeah,
So
but
now-
that kind of thing didn't grow where we lived.
Yeah,
yeah, I know.
exactly.
That's what I'm saying.
You'd have
So
to
you
have
had it
seal-
much harder than we did.
You'd have to milk a seal.
Yeah.
And then
The
tell it while
seal.
you're milking it that I'm coming for your liver. Oh man, Deanne, thank
Wow.
you so much for joining us. It's a true pleasure. And everyone, again, the book is
Mm.
Journey Through Fire and Ice, and you
Mm.
get it through DeanneBurch.com, and that's BURCH, DeanneBurch.com, and also all the places like Amazon, all those good stores, and
Mm.
get it. Ask your local bookstore to carry it too. That's always good to support the local bookstores.
Was
So
definitely worth reading.
yeah,
Definitely.
Nancy's been enjoying this, and
Mm.
everyone keep
Make
up
me
with us.
laugh.
Keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. Thanks so much, Deanne.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.